Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Businessology Show. We always have great guests that actually teach us how to run businesses, how to run agencies. Service-based organizations trying to scale these companies is difficult. And so we have people who actually do it. And we have Karl Sakas coming on the show, actually just a consultant, has done this, worked in agencies for many years, have consulted with agencies, has books out. Just to read a few things, he has his latest book over a year ago, Work Less, Earn More, while creating professional growth opportunities for agency employees. So super cool. And drawn on his background in operations, Karl has personally advised tons of agencies on, this is cool, every inhabited continent. He is a speaker, international speaker. If you go to his site, tons of articles on agency management. So there's a ton of content that Karl puts out. So Karl, thank you so much for coming on the Businessology Show, man. I'm glad to have you.
Jason, great to be here and looking forward to helping people.
Very cool. Now, but I got to ask you one more thing in your bio. When he's not helping clients, Karl volunteers as a bartender on an antique train. So do you still do that?
I do. For over a decade. I have a trip coming up in June from New York to DC. It's like something out of an old movie, for overnight trips. Beds flip down from the ceiling. We're making drinks to order. There's a kitchen with meals prepared on board.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a 90-ton, 90-foot rolling bed and breakfast on the end of an Amtrak train. And we can go anywhere that Amtrak goes.
That is so cool. That bartending is just an incredibly creative thing. I've actually sat there at a bar before going, man, I wish I knew how to do this. Is that you just got creative about wanting to do this at some point? What got you into that?
The main angle for me is I like trains. So
okay.
That was the initial thing. But trains, travel, history. I also get to use my client service skills, in taking care of passengers. It's all owned by a nonprofit based in DC. It's called the Dover Harbor. And our goal is to help people see what history was like. We don't pretend that it's the past.
Yeah.
But ultimately the goal is to provide a level of service that most people today would not have experienced in their lives.
That is so cool, man. Yeah. I love that. Well, cool. Well, let's dive in. I'm going to pull a lot of agency management knowledge out of your head today. And I guess I want to start with a kind of a big picture question about agency leadership. What even, because you work with a lot of leaders. So what is agency leadership? Like, what would you expect an agency leader to be doing, to not be doing? Are they not in the revenue production client service? Then what are they doing? How do you counsel agency owners around their leadership?
We could look at this from a few angles. Agency leader is a shorthand for agency owner or executive, someone who is running an agency. They may be an employee or they may be an owner. And, as a leader, that's sort of positioned against being, say, a manager. Now, the reality is leaders need to manage and managers ideally are leading. Yeah. One way to look at it would be that managers are focused on the go, right? We've got to get this done. We've got to keep moving. We've got to be efficient, focus on completion of tasks and things like that. Leaders, on the other hand, ideally are able to step back a bit and pause and look at the big picture and try to figure out what needs to happen for the future, planning ahead more rather than just what's right in front of them. Another analogy that I use for that is around shifting from being a firefighter to the fire marshal, right? Yeah. The fire marshal is sorting out, how do we prevent future fires? How do we keep people safe? How do we learn from past situations to make things go more smoothly in the future? So, the leader is perhaps more of the fire marshal at the agency rather than the firefighter.
That's cool. I've never heard that. That's a pretty cool way to do it. And then the fire marshal is walking around checking the doors, checking the policies, making sure things are in place to keep this organization safe, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, do you work with agency leaders who, and I'm sure this is true. These are owners, so they're overwhelmed a lot of times. Like, how would you go after helping them know what not to do? Like, what really should never be on the plate of? And I guess I don't want to use agency leader. I'll say agency owner because
Sure.
they are
Yeah.
a leader. Like, what is that owner? What do you have to get off their plate? And what do you work? What kind of fears do you work with through helping them do that?
Part of my process when I'm consulting or coaching with agencies is to understand what I call their values, goals, and resources, VGR.
Nice, nice,
Values on how they choose to operate, goals on where they want to go, and resources in terms of time, money, people,
cool.
software, so on to get there. So part of the process is to understand where they've been, where they are now, and where they want to go. And that looks at a range of things. So, what an owner should or shouldn't be doing, some of that will depend on what their preferences are.
Mm.
Though someone at the agency has to be doing things. For instance, owners tend to be more involved in sales, and over time, they're less involved in day-to-day client billables.
Hmm.
But for instance, if they like doing high-end client strategy, I'm not going to say stop doing it. If you like doing it,
Yeah.
keep doing it. But someone else, perhaps you'll bring in someone on your team to handle account management day to day. So you're not the day-to-day client contact for everything. You get to show up and do the fun strategy stuff, but you're not the one dealing with, oh, they're rescheduling another meeting, that kind
Right.
of thing. So a lot of it depends on what they want to do.
Mm.
But ultimately, owners tend to become less and less client-facing over time.
Yeah, which is hard on these these technical creative owners. It's like that's what they got into this profession really to do.
Yes.
And now you're moving them or you're counseling them to move away from client facing strategies. But that's kind of how we let them know that too. Like what do you do when they say I want to be with clients and they're still trying to grow and they have an agency of 15, 20 people and they're like I still want to go hang out with clients. What do you say to them?
I mean, ultimately, it comes down to I use a tool that I've developed. I call it advanced retrospective, where they write about their future day as if it's already happened.
That's
And,
cool.
if one of the takeaways is, say, they're meeting with their favorite client and they're doing this and that, I wouldn't be advising them to stop doing that. I would say, though, if they're at, say, that 15 to 20 mark, they have to make a decision. If they want to grow the agency from there, say to 50 people or 100 people or something, and if they want to stay as the CEO, they probably aren't going to be that client-facing anymore.
Mm.
But just because you're the owner of the agency doesn't mean you need to be the CEO. Now, someone needs to, and you can hire someone. I've helped clients do this where they build a succession plan with my support, and they bring someone in to serve eventually as president or managing director or even CEO. You have options. But I would start by identifying, what do you like doing? What don't you like doing? And then structure your life to get there. Now, sometimes people conclude that the agency isn't the best way to reach their long-term goals. Maybe they don't like managing people at all. Yes, you can outsource managing to, say, a COO or a day-to-day president or things like that, but you're still managing them. And you're still probably managing the sales, marketing, and partnerships team in addition to managing, say, the COO. So you're still going to have managing involved. But the other thing to consider would be, say, if you want to grow or without giving up client contact, you want to look at ways to grow billables without growing your headcount. So some of that's through efficiency, could be value-based pricing, could be AI, could be something else.
Yeah.
But I would say if you like being close to the clients, the higher your headcount, the harder that's going to be.
That is cool, and I like how you answered, which is there's no one size fits all, right? These agencies they're just very intimate businesses, right? They're run by these very creative people, and so depending on what they want to do, you went towards what is their personal goal. And that's what really needs to drive how they structure teams, how they pull themselves out of a position or lean into their position because not everybody's, made to be the CEO. And sometimes they don't even know what it means to be the CEO.
Right.
And sometimes that can be surprising and overwhelming for them, I guess. So.
It can be. And I mean, they're often agency owners are what I would call accidental business owners, where they kind of got pulled into running a business, but it wasn't originally
Yeah.
their plan.
Yeah.
And for anyone listening, if that's you, if you're an accidental agency owner, there's no shame in it. There's nothing bad about it. But you may need to step back and think more strategically and intentionally about what you need going forward.
Yeah. So let's say, and this may happen a lot if we consult with an agency, typically there's some issue they're having, right? So they're calling in, accounts, somebody to consult with them. If you work with an agency and there's a lack of leadership,
Yes.
are there kind of signs of that? Like if there's an agency that has a lack of leadership, or there's somebody that doesn't want to lead, they're pulling away from leading, or they're disappearing, they're hiding, they need to go rest, but they're going on too many vacations. The team's like, where are they going? What are some of the pain points that agency's going to face if there's not a strong leader in place that stays close to that team?
The theme to all of that is around the owner creating, inadvertently, most likely, what we could call a leadership vacuum. That is, the leader is not leading. And that could include, for instance, giving the team direction about the long-term vision.
Yeah.
What are the general growth goals? I had a client where the team was like, well, what's our plan? Are we going to keep working out of this office forever? Or are we going to move to a bigger space? Or are we going to go virtual? What's the plan? Are we going to go from, at the time it was about 4 million in revenue? Are we going to want to try to go to 10 million or 100 million? Or are we okay as it is? What are their career paths within the agency and things like that? And those were questions that ideally owners are answering as leaders. And I coached my client in that case on doing that. And that really helped in terms of both team retention and client retention once people knew where they fit and where the agency was going. But there's that leadership vacuum that can also happen if the owner expects the team to make decisions, but doesn't give them enough guidance about the values, goals, and resources to consider. And so the team is doing their best, but it's not necessarily going to produce the right result for the owner. Yeah. One symptom that you could consider is that if you're an agency owner and your team is interrupting you all the time, you may have created a leadership vacuum where either they don't know what they need to get decisions done, or you may have trained them to come to you all the time rather than letting them feel confident about making decisions on their own. My suggestion is to define guardrails where either you can say, if it is anything other than these exceptions, you can do whatever makes sense. Or you could do it the other way. You could say, if it's on this list of things that are inclusions, go for it. If not, I want to talk to you. Oftentimes when owners are getting interrupted all the time, it's because they've inadvertently trained their team to ask all the time. And the book Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet has a great framework and solution for that.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. That's a great book suggestion. I haven't heard that one. I want to hear that. That's good. Yeah. It's really cool to hear a symptom. Like if you're seeing this happen, this may be a root issue that's causing that. I love those kind of things because a lot of times those symptoms, those kind of presenting issues, we may not know. We think those are the issue, and we don't realize there's some deeper root thing to that. And you explaining the hookup to that symptom and the root issue is awesome. Now, when I love that. So you're saying a leader, there's some information they need to share with this team so they know their growth path, what's coming. Is there too much to share? Or how does the agency leader know when I'm sharing too much, meaning I'm freaking my team out, right? I keep telling them all of my ideas and it's really upsetting them. And then how do you know when they're not sharing enough? I mean, how do you balance that or help them balance that?
I recommend that when owners and other agency leaders go to a conference, they impose an idea quarantine on themselves. That is, they got all these great ideas, and I mean, they're great ideas, but don't immediately come back to the office or the virtual team and tell them everything you just learned over the past couple of days.
That's overwhelming.
It is. Now, perhaps tell your number two, tell your assistant, kind of thing, but don't tell the whole team, here are all these things we're going to do, because they're wondering, well, all right, which of these are we doing?
Yeah.
What about the priorities you gave us last month? How does that fit together? So the
Right.
idea of quarantine is to wait at least a week or so before you dump it on everyone, because then you can
Mm.
work with your number two and work with your assistant and sort through, okay, which of these make sense as priorities? Which do we want to share with the team? If you use a structure like EOS, you can use
Yep.
EOS, the level 10 meetings and things like that to
Hmm.
share rather than just filling Slack or sending an all hands email with all of the great new ideas. And that can apply to other things as well. But generally, keep in mind that as the owner, your team perceives anything you say as 100 times more important than what anyone else says. Because they know it's your business, they know you're the boss.
Yeah.
Everyone is listening and paying attention to everything you
Mm.
say and do.
Yeah. But that's it. It is wild, Karl, that owners don't readily know that. And so even if you tell them, hey, quit freaking your team out, like
Yeah.
you just shared 20 ideas,
Mhm.
they think you're going to go do all of those. And then they're going, you're going to make me do all that work. And it's like agency owners, well, a lot of owners, I guess, in general, just don't realize, no, people heard you. They're taking to heart and think that's going to be a practical idea. And I don't know why agency owners don't really realize what you're saying is being heard and they're filtering it through their own perspective. There's just so much psychology to that leadership.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd say it's not their fault, right? As
Yeah,
leaders, we tend to focus on role models, and if you haven't had good bosses in the past,
true.
you're going off that, or maybe say if you've had a bad boss, you try to do something that's 180 degrees from what the bad boss did, but that
Right.
isn't necessarily the right approach for your own leadership style.
Yeah.
I believe that we all benefit from manager training, leadership development, leadership training and things like that. If you're looking for an intro management training,
Mm.
Manager Tools has an excellent one, the Effective Manager Conference. That's
Cool.
at manager-tools.com. I've done the
Cool.
in-person one. I've also sent my team to their virtual version. It's great content, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, I love that. Okay, so you have been in agency operations, and sometimes when we're working with agency owners, of course, they have this creative output, right? That's
Yeah.
how they make money, especially when it was just them or them and two or three other people or
Mhm.
contractors. They were very aware that their business was around selling creative output. At some size, an agency gets large enough, they have to start developing the operational underpinning, that actually runs the engine. And I guess that's going to be, operations. It's going to be project management, account management. Some of that's in creative departments, I guess.
Yeah.
So, when do agency owners start thinking about an operational side of their business and somebody running that with them or for them because they may not be best for that? When do they start thinking about that, or should they?
There are a couple paths on that. If we're looking at, say, project management, you probably want to hire a project manager, full-time PM. Once you're at 8 to 12 headcount, that's in terms
Cool.
of full-time team members,
Mm,
you could hire sooner, for instance, if you're what I would call an on-demand agency where you've got a core team and then you have freelancers or white label firms doing most of the fulfillment. In that case, a project manager might be the first person you hire as a full-time person. Maybe it's the owner. Maybe you've had freelancers. It's time to hire a full-time PM to
nice.
coordinate all of the freelancers. But
Mm,
if your team is more FTE oriented, full-time equivalent oriented, in that case, you might hire a PM in the 8 to 12 headcount range. In terms of operations, I usually see agencies start operations, which we could think of as the non-billable work. It could be about finance, it could be
yeah.
about HR, it could be about potentially your own self-marketing. I did that as an operations manager.
Mm,
But ultimately, you're going to start that part-time around the same time. And certainly as you get to, say, 15 people, you definitely need someone part-time in operations. And as you head towards,
mm,
say, 25, you're probably going to have a full-time person. Now, keep in mind, you don't have to do it all yourself. You don't have to do it all in-house.
hmm.
For instance, thinking in terms of, say, accounting services,
Yeah.
a 15-person agency should not hire a full-time accountant in
Right.
their agency. They don't need
Exactly.
it. It's overkill. But someone needs to do it. So you might have, say, an operations manager at 15 or 20 people
Mm,
who's helping oversee an outside firm. And the CEO needs to be involved too, but kind of day-to-day delegation, things
sure.
like that. So someone needs to do it, but it doesn't always need to be a full-time in-house
Mm,
role. On the other hand, if your agency has 100 people, you're probably going to have
yeah.
several full-time operations people.
Yeah. No,
And
that's
still
good.
probably will do some degree of outsourcing too.
Yeah, for sure. Because that outsourcing gives you some specialties
Yeah.
that you don't need to hire full time onto a team at. And I guess at all the levels of agency sizes, there's always going to be specialty type work you can outsource to
Yes.
somebody else. I mean, I guess this isn't really operational, but team structure kind of
Mhm.
design. What it? How do you counsel them around hiring team onto
Mhm.
the team versus using contractors to provide some of the services? Both of those are
Mhm.
doing revenue production.
Yes.
Contractors can be very expensive.
Mhm.
And so what are the thoughts you kind of walk through? One's going to, there could be, if you get that mix wrong, they could start to really struggle to be profitable and things
Yes.
like that. So how do you counsel around how to get that mix right? Full-time payroll, FTEs, contractors, how do you do that?
Here are some things to consider with that decision. First, if they are providing a service that is strategically important to the agency, it's, say, your core service. Maybe you're like, we're a web design agency, so it'd be web design and development. Maybe you're a creative agency, so that would be doing the design and writing side of creative and beyond,
Mhm.
or you're an SEO agency or things like that. You probably want to do that in-house with full-time employees as soon as you can. Maybe
Yeah.
in the initial days you're working with freelancers, but even if you outsource a lot of that later, you do need in-house people to oversee the work and make sure that it's done correctly. So that's one component. If it's strategic, you probably do it with full-time employees,
Makes
at
sense.
least at the core.
Yeah.
Another consideration is around markup potential. So my general guideline is that if you have an employee, you should be billing them out at least 3 times what you're paying them on an hourly equivalent. For instance, you're paying them the equivalent of $50 an hour, you should bill them at least $150 an hour. With
Mm.
contractors, instead of 3 times, it's a 2x multiple. Why that? Well, among other things, the contractors are going to be specialists at what they do. So they're
Mhm.
likely going to be more effective at their job in less time.
Mm.
But also, you're ultimately only paying for the help that you need
Mm.
versus the 3x markup. That's for employees that you're paying full time, whether they're billable or not. So that
Mm.
gets into that around what would you be paying contractors versus what would you be paying employees. Of
Mm.
course, if you need someone full time, then you should hire them as an employee. Otherwise, you're risking worker classification issues, and talk to your advisors on that. But if
Right.
you have a full-time contractor that you're not paying through a staffing firm, that is a bad idea. You
It
shouldn't do
is
that.
bad.
Don't do it.
That's a no-no.
Yeah, yeah. And then beyond that, I think you need to decide what is your overall agency model. So we could think of 3 agency models. The traditional model is what we could call a full stack agency. You're doing the client facing work and you're doing fulfillment.
Mm.
And over the years, there have been what I would call back end agencies, white label agencies doing fulfillment for other firms.
Yeah.
There's a newer model, which I've labeled the front end agency. That is, the agency is focused on the client facing work, doing
Mm.
brand building for the firm itself, doing sales and marketing and things like that. But then they tend to outsource most of the fulfillment to other agencies or potentially freelancers. The
Yeah.
benefit of that approach of being a front end agency is that as work goes up or down, you can adjust your outsourcing rather than suddenly
Mm.
needing to hire 20 people and then lay off 20
Mm.
people, things
Yeah.
like that. It's not for everyone. The traditional model
Mm.
of the full stack agency, we're doing client facing and fulfillment, can work. But if you've noticed that getting creaky, it may make sense to consider a
Mm.
change.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me to, this the next question as we're
Yeah.
kind of rounding out here. And it's the market is just weird right now.
Yeah.
For a lot of our clients, some are specialists in very niched markets, and they're doing well. Some are struggling. Some are just tired after the pandemic, and they're selling their agencies.
Yeah.
And so you were just now sharing a lot of different models, and it's good to switch because sometimes people just get overwhelmed. But
Yes.
what are you seeing in the market? Like, can you just tell us the agency profession is kind of feeling this way generally? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yes. So 2023, I would say, was the worst year for most agencies in over a decade.
Man,
So, if anyone listening, you're like, that was a bad year, it's not
you're,
just you. I
you're
talked
not
with,
alone.
exactly. I talked with a client in December of 2023 who had mentioned that it looked like his revenue was going to barely grow that year compared to a higher growth goal. And I said, that actually is ahead of a lot of agencies. I noted that he hadn't had any layoffs. He hadn't, as some agencies had looked considering shutting down or actually shutting down. And so even growing just a few percentage points in 2023 was above average. In the end, he grew more than that. But this beginning part of 2024 is not necessarily much better for most agencies. And my prediction, is this going to be true? I don't know. No one has a crystal ball. But my suspicion is that things won't fully clear up until after the U.S. presidential election, when people have an idea of what next. So I would consider thinking about that accordingly. If things go better than expected, what makes sense? But if they don't, how will you be prepared?
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. It's good to just hear you say some of those things, since you see a lot of different agencies. And I think we would agree we see some of those same things. In 2024 is still, I think we're finally not officially going into a recession. That was a fear last year. We're not
Yeah.
going into that. But people are still feeling the same way, very fearful, and sales cycles are longer, pipelines are getting pushed out. And the election year, I mean, sometimes it's hard to figure out why does that drive such. I guess it's just uncertainty. Is that what
No
you
one
think that
likes
is?
no one likes uncertainty,
Yeah.
and that can also create blockages on taking action. I think a lot of the agency slowdown was from all of the recession predictions in
Yeah.
2023,
Mm,
where it seemed like it didn't happen. But
right.
if clients were concerned about spending money, they're not going to spend money, which negatively impacts the agencies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's tough. Well, what do you think about some agencies are selling?
Mhm.
I think some of them are just tired. They're getting done.
Yeah.
Um, is it possible that you could run into an agency owner that is just they're just so frustrated they're going to sell and really throw in the towel too soon? Is there a way to counsel somebody, you need to think about that clearly, maybe don't do it yet? Or just how do you help them not do something wrong that is so monumental in their life?
I mean, ultimately, will the agency help them reach their long-term goals? If it will, great. If it won't, then it does make sense to consider, what's the right exit. If
Mm,
it's a situation where the agency will help you reach your goals, but it's not doing it now, you need to sort out, okay, you've got point A, what's point B, what needs to happen in between? And sometimes that requires getting some outside perspective. Other
mm,
times is just pausing to identify, okay, where are we now? Where do we want to go? What will it take to get there? And if what you've been doing all along isn't working anymore, you'll have to do something else. And it does make sense to consider exit strategy at all times.
yeah.
I'm doing a workshop in October of 2024 with a past client. We worked together for a number of years to help him sell the agency, and then he did.
Nice.
So he's
Yeah.
not a client anymore because he doesn't have an agency anymore. But we're doing a
Right.
workshop together about how to control and maximize your exit. And one of the
Nice.
things to it is, even if you weren't planning to sell now, you want to lay the groundwork to have the option to do it. What hopefully you would avoid, I got a very sad outreach last year where an agency owner had died unexpectedly.
Oh man.
And the family's financial advisor was reaching out and they're trying to figure out, like, what do we do? And there hadn't been an exit plan. There hadn't been there was some succession planning, but not to that extent, kind of thing. And they were trying to sort out what to do. And so I shared some advice and pointed them to some other resources to help them through things. No one expects that.
That is
But
tough.
it can happen. And when you consider that for the independent agencies I work with, the agency for the owners is their family's number one or number two financial asset.
Yep.
You need it to pay off. What else in your financial portfolio is paying you six figures in compensation, is producing 6 or 7 figures in pass-through,
Yep.
profits from the business, and what could sell for a million or multi-million dollar payday? Probably nothing else in your portfolio.
Yeah.
So take good care of your agency, and that includes getting advice and planning ahead. So you hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. You have to be intentional about the value of this entity that you're running.
Yes.
And how it can, affect and really care for your family. So doing things like, hiring consultants like you that is an investment in this entity, being able to provide for you long term. And it's just, it's hard to see people not really find value in that sometimes. So
it is, but I mean, it's the same thing that agencies run into where, you can see a client. I think I've written about this as the idea of want versus need.
Yeah.
Every client ultimately needs an agency's help in some way, but does the client want to pay for it? If they don't, it's not your job eventually to persuade them that if they need it but don't want it, you can't make them want it.
Yeah. You can't make them pay you and get the value of your services if they're truly not committed.
Exactly. So fast fail things and move on to someone else who does appreciate your agency's help and will pay what you're worth and who's a great client to work with. They are out there, and the longer you waste on clients that up front are a terrible match, the harder it is to get to the clients that will be the great ones.
Good stuff. Okay. All right. As we're wrapping up, I got to ask you a question about your book, Work Less, Earn More. It's like, sign me up for that. So that's good stuff. Those economics almost even seem to contradict one another, but I know you have got models in how you teach that.
Yes.
So what is the baseline to work less but earn more at the same time? What are some of the basic principles and teachings around that?
Absolutely. So in the book, available on Amazon worldwide, the subtitle of the book has perhaps a starter to that. So it's Work Less, Earn More, How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership.
Nice.
So it is very much focused on owners. Now, if the owner is working less and earning more, someone is going to be working more, and that's true. Your team is going to have more to do, but why would they want to do that? Well, those are their professional growth opportunities. Those are opportunities to get paid more.
That's cool.
I've worked with clients on building succession plans, and as they're implementing them, for instance, one client had a team member go from account manager to director of client services to VP and now president, and eventually could be running everything, and they're making more money along the way, and they're growing. So your team likely wants to step up if you'll let them, and you need to pay them. But that's also where things from an incentive perspective, perhaps a percentage, based on, say they're overseeing delivery, they have some incentives related to the gross profit margin, for instance, or if they are running everything, then probably net profit margins, things like that. Your team wants to step up. They want the opportunities. They want to stay. When you as the owner step back, make yourself increasingly optional as you're working less and earning more, your team wins as well. It's a win-win situation when you do it right. And in the Work Less, Earn More book, I talk through a step-by-step process to make that happen based on your unique situation.
Yeah, I love that, Karl. It's really leveraging the value of why you started an agency in the first place, that you can grow it large enough to then step back and let other people step in, which is other people stepping into their career goals. It's like you can find people that want to step in And ultimately, that can even be a succession plan. They can come to own this thing too. And that's cool. So is it true that some people run an agency and they run themselves as the owner in the ground? And your book is saying, no, you have this agency that's working. You step back, work less, and your agency will continue to produce income for you even as you as the owner is stepping back. Is that a summary also?
It can. You'll need to make sure that you delegate rather than abdicate, right? You can't just assume
Right.
everything will be fine and you
Right.
you disappear completely. But it can. I mean, that's ultimately separating the roles. If you ever see like the back of an 18-wheeler, sometimes the trailer will say we're looking for owner operators.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that with your business, you are an owner and an operator, probably both right now.
Yeah.
But technically, they're separate roles. Like if you have shares of stock in a public company, you're an owner, but you're not an operator unless you happen to work for that public company. You can be both, or you can separate it. You could hire someone to be CEO and move to a chair role. Help different clients do versions of that over the years. But it all comes down to where do you want to go? Will the agency help you reach your long-term goals? And then work backwards, as Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind to make it happen. But it will require some changes, and you'll have to stop letting things fester because they're not going to magically get better on their own.
That's right. Yeah. You have to change as a person and go through the process.
Yeah.
Working less, delegating, not abdicating. And then this agency that you've built can start to pay you even as you're working less, which is super. What a cool promise, if you do it right. So
Yes.
Cool. Well, Karl, where should they go first to find you online?
If you want to get a copy of the Work Less, Earn More book, it's available on Amazon worldwide in print, Kindle, and Audible form. If you'd prefer to listen to it, you can go to worklessearnmorebook.com. You can get a free sample chapter. You can get all the Amazon links. You can even get a free companion workbook to help you through the exercises in the book. That's at worklessearnmorebook.com. And you can also access hundreds of free resources at my website, between blog posts and a newsletter that more than one owner has called the only email they read every time. And that is all available at sakasandcompany.com, SAKASAND, the word company.com. Click on free resources and get access to all that.
I love it. Well, Karl Sakas, thank you so much for consulting with the agency profession and then teaching us on the show. It's good to know you. I've known you for a long time. I haven't seen you in a while, so It's good to see you again. And thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you, Karl.
Thanks so much.
All right, take care.